Okay, welcome to TOCA Backstage. This is a look behind the scenes of the Torrance Cultural Arts Foundation through chats with artists and other creatives. Today, I'm honored to have Patricia Ward Kelly. She is the star and creator of Gene Kelly, The Legacy, which will be at the James Armstrong Theater Saturday, October 6th at 2 o'clock and 8 o'clock. Tickets are available at www.torrancearts.org. or by calling the ticket office at 310-781-7171. Now, we all know who Gene Kelly is, of course. Famous for films like For Me and My Gal, Anchors Away, The Pirate, On the Town, American in Paris, Singing in the Rain, and others. And you had the honor of being his wife for a number of years. Tell me, what inspired you to do this show?
Well, in addition to being his wife, before I was his wife, he brought me out to California to be his biographer, to write his memoir and to write his story. And so I had the unusual position of being both a journalist and a wife. And I don't think many spouses have that unique position that they're writing down everything that their husband says every minute of the day. And if I wasn't writing it down, Gene was keeping track, and he would look over and say, "You're not writing anything down." And I'd say, "Well, I'm eating," or something. So it was a unique position that I had, that I recorded him in some fashion nearly every day for over 10 years. And it's a story that no one has, because what was interesting about it was that as our relationship developed, then Gene began to let down more and more of his guard. He was a very reserved man, and I always say what you know about him is what he allowed you to know. But as our decade together grew, then he began to not only reveal things to me, but reveal things to himself, which I think was pretty astonishing, because you don't see many people of that stature and that celebrity and that age willing to really honestly take a look at themselves and at their lives and what they contributed. He could easily have just rested on his laurels and,
Sure.
and done with that. But he was engaged in this process with me, and so it was a very interesting process. And by the end of his life, he actually even referred to it as a confessional, and it was a way for him to, I think, really wrangle with some things that he had not wrangled with. And so he would have been 100 years old in 2012, and the Academy of Motion Pictures always does a tribute to the legends. And I knew I had attended several of those, and I knew Gene's was coming up. And so I approached them because Gene was very specific about how he wished to be remembered. He was very specific about everything in his life, as people know. But he also spoke to me very often about wanting to be remembered for being behind the camera more than in front. And people think of him up on that screen,
Sure.
but they don't realize that he created what you see. He directed and choreographed it. And he was very specific with me that that's what my job was to get that word out. And so I went to the Academy, and very graciously, they agreed to let me create this evening. And it sort of took off like Topsy. It just, I think people responded to it because they love him, but they also loved learning about this man, the man behind the scenes, and the man, what propelled him, what drove him, what inspired him, what moved him, what made him cry, what made him laugh. And so it's a very intimate and very personal show. And I think it just then took off and has been going around the world for the last 6 years. And I've done Switzerland 3 times, and Luxembourg and Sweden. And it's just, I think people relate to it in an interesting way, because it goes into all kinds of things. And I always describe it, I say it's like it's a journey with me. You get in a little boat, and you kind of trust me because you don't know quite what you're getting. And there's nothing quite like it. It's not a standard one-woman show. I'm not singing and dancing. We let him do that. But you get in this boat, and by the end of the journey, you have learned a lot, and I think it's a kind of transformative experience as well.
Now, you've been doing this for a number of years. During that time, while you're doing it, do you ever recall something new and fresh that you had not shared with the audience before?
The show is different every night because it's all extemporaneous. I mean, obviously the clips, I show these brilliant film clips up on a big screen, and that in itself, you could just come and see that.
Right.
And that's worth something. But then Gene used to sing to me at night. That was one of the ways that he revealed some of the deepest things about his life, because when he got really, as I say, when he got really close to the bone, then he would often revert to song lyrics and songs. And so I have these extraordinary recordings of him that people have never heard. And I actually have some of his belongings with me. And so it just takes people deeper and deeper and deeper into his life. But I listen to the audience, and if I hear them respond to something, then sometimes I'll go one direction.
Sure.
or shift gears, or someone will. I greet people before the show. I come out and say hello, and I also stay after as long as people wish to be here. And it's usually in those conversations that people say things to me that I then add something, or that the problem is I could add so much. I mean, there's just, as I'm uncovering things, but people have said some funny things that I've incorporated in the show, and it's fun because then you take one city with you to another and different things. I mean, in Pittsburgh, Gene always wanted to be shortstop for the Pittsburgh Pirates. So I have his Pittsburgh Pirates uniform. And so I had that in Pittsburgh, and I had different things in Beverly Hills. And so it's fun. It's fun because it doesn't feel canned. It's interactive. You hear the people around you laughing, you hear them crying. So the audience is as much a part of the show as I am, and that responsiveness is what's so, I think, so kind of electrifying.
So you had 10 years to gather, or approximately 10 years to gather sort of all the wealth of experience that he's been through for his biography. How long did it take you to culminate all that into a show?
It's interesting. People always ask that question. They always want to know, how long did it take? And I literally wrote it overnight. I say that, but in fact, it was, 20 years in the making of.
Sure.
You accumulate information and then you distill it. And I think after his death, it took me a long time before I could even look at the materials. It was they come packed with such an emotional punch, when you see handwritten notes and things. And so, and then I think I had to also, you have to come to terms with who this man was and is and keeps going. I mean, he's kind of like this, ongoing evergreen thing. And people around the world love him. And so he's been gone 22 years, but it's like he's brand new. And so there are all these different layers. And but to really sit down, I knew exactly, because as I say, he was very specific, and I knew what he liked. He and I ran all the movies together. I kept a tape recorder running. So I know how he felt about each scene, and I know what he said about it. So that's what I share with the audiences. And people are always like, oh my God, I never saw that. I never thought of that, or I never noticed that. And so they get to see things in the show that they've seen many, many times, but they may not have looked at in the same way. They'll see some things they've probably not seen before, and they'll definitely hear some things they've never heard before. So it's all, and it's every age. I have, I always say it's 5 years old to 95 years old, and there's no demographic. As men and women enjoy it equally. And I even had a 2.5-year-old come to the show. He had memorized all of Gene's lyrics, and he came back at 3.5 to see it again. And I've had a 7-year-old came, and I think this is he's actually coming to the show. And again, I think this will be his 5th or 6th time of seeing it. So that gives you an idea that it it doesn't matter. It isn't, you don't have to see it once. You can see it multiple times and still continue to get things out of it.
Well, yeah, I imagine with the wealth of work that he's done, there's got to be, new and exciting things for people to learn about. I mean, when I was a kid, I grew up loving old movies and would go to the local art museum, and down in the basement they would show old movies. And whenever there was, a Fred Astaire, Gene Kelly movie, I was there and loved them all. What do you think? I'm sure he's talked about this, but what do you think was the accomplishment he was most proud of?
He, it's interesting, watching things was very hard for him to watch his own work because he was so critical of what he did, and he would always see something that he just wished he had done slightly better, or if his leg were in a different position or something. Sure. So it was, he was very, very proud of the American in Paris Ballet. I think he realized, and he's actually the named director of that segment of the movie. Vincent Minnelli directed the picture, but Gene directed that and 2 other scenes and choreographed the entire movie. And I think what people forget nowadays is how revolutionary that was.
Sure.
How radical to put a 17.5-minute ballet at the end of a movie. Gene said that he and Vincent Minnelli were worried that the audience would just get up and walk out. But instead it won the Academy Award. And I think Gene always looked at, he didn't have this immense ego about the work. He knew that it took this incredible team to do everything, that to make him look good on the screen. You had the great lighting people, all the technical people, the camera operators, the cinematographers, and the costumes, when you look at the costumes in the ballet. So I think he realized it was a whole, and that you had to bring all of these remarkable people together, the songwriters, a Gershwin score. But he was very proud of that. And I think, what he really wanted the mark he wanted to make was changing the look of dance on film and creating a particularly American style of dance. And we've now seen it so much on television. We've seen, you turn it on and there's Gene. Everybody has absorbed him, everybody on Dancing with the Stars. And So You Think You Can Dance. They're all influenced by him, and all their steps are influenced. But you have to, when you go back to Gene, you have to remember that he's breaking new ground. People were not dancing like this.
Right.
Men were not dancing like this. People were ballroom dancing, and it was a very different, very European style. And Gene he'd grown up in Pittsburgh and as a lower middle class kid, and he wanted to create something that related to him. And that was to dance to Cole Porter and Gershwin and Rodgers and Hart, and to make it a very strong athletic movement that was the way he saw guys move on the baseball field or football or hockey. He wanted to be a hockey player.
Well, I remember specifically the pirate was sort of the key to that. That in that movie, it was almost acrobatic and very masculine. From a personal perspective, what do you miss the most about him?
Oh gosh, it's hard to. Boy, I miss the brightness of his mind, and I think the tenderness of his heart. It was kind of a wonderful combination, and that's one of the things that the show, I think, reveals, these many sides to him of this tremendous wealth of knowledge, this great humility, this great integrity, a man of immense integrity, a man of wit, not a kind of stand-up comedy kind of wit, but guy would just drop me to the floor he'd say something, and I literally would be on the floor laughing, and I still laugh at these little funny phrases he had, and I think that the sense of romanticism, you know, a romantic. He was really a romantic at heart. And I, you know, I don't see that combination very often, if ever. People always ask me if I've, you know, remarried and it's a pretty hard act to follow.
Yeah, I imagine.
To find somebody with all those, and it wasn't just a knowledge of dance. It was a knowledge of history and literature and poetry and mathematics and economics. And so you might find one person really gifted in one area of that, but to really have, he just felt you needed to absorb everything, and he did. And so he was the real Renaissance man.
Yeah, I was going to say that does sound like an appropriate description, because you're right. Usually you find somebody who's, you know, interested in dance, and that's all their focus. But to know so much about so many different things, it really takes a certain kind of man, a genius almost.
Well, and not to mention, I mean, we don't have to ignore the fact that he was drop dead gorgeous.
Oh, there is that.
I mean, he was terribly handsome, but he also had a great beauty to him. I have his mask from the makeup masks that they use, the plaster mask that they used at MGM. And it's interesting because I kind of stare at it and it's Gene. It's exactly Gene. But he had great, handsome face, but he also had this beauty, a kind of delicacy in it that was quite beautiful. That you see him up on the screen, and that's again in the show. When you have a great projector and you have a big screen, unlike an iPhone or a television, you see how gorgeous these people are.
Yeah, well, I think films like his and all those classics need to be really seen on a big screen. It does them injustice to watch them on a little, you know.
It's a different experience, and I think the communal experience of the audience is different, and the different age groups. When you see people who have seen him 100 times, and you see people who've never seen him, and you're all in there experiencing it. It's. I mean, I hate to blow my own horn for the show, but it's really a magical thing. There's something that happens in that room.
No, I agree. I've always wondered this. You had Gene Kelly, you had Fred Astaire back in the day. Were they friends?
They were friends. Everyone always assumes that Fred influenced Gene. And interestingly, Gene never even saw Fred Astaire perform. He'd already created his own style of dance before he saw Flying Down to Rio and saw Astaire's style. Mm-hmm. And Astaire's style of dance was exactly what Gene was trying to break away from. It was the European tradition of dancing on polished floors. They were usually wealthy people, and Gene didn't want to dance like rich people. He wanted to dance like, as he always said, the common man, his guys. Mm-hmm. And so, but then when he saw Astaire, I mean, obviously Astaire was incredible at what he did. And the public, there was something about Astaire and Rogers that the public bought. Gene always said that if the public didn't buy you, they're buying those tickets. And if they didn't buy you, you might be the greatest dancer around, but you didn't become the big star. And there was some chemical thing that people liked about Astaire and Rogers. And Gene said there were much better dance teams, but Astaire had this thing that people loved. And interestingly, and I do talk about this a little bit, it was Astaire who was influenced by Gene. Astaire came in and Gene's ankle got broken playing volleyball in his backyard. He was a demon on the volleyball team and the back playing. And a friend of his came down and snapped his ankle accidentally. And Gene had choreographed most of Easter Parade with Judy Garland, but he had to withdraw. And he suggested Astaire and brought Astaire out of retirement. And Astaire then is dancing to Gene's choreography, and so you see this infusion of a completely different style. And if you watch Astaire subsequently, his bandwagon and things, he's begun to adapt that style. And so you see a turn in Astaire versus Gene. But they were very different. They were diametrically opposed in the politics. Jean was a liberal Democrat, and Astaire was the right-wing Republican. And they also, it was interesting because you kind of think that Astaire would be the more educated one. And in fact, it was Jean who went to college, and Astaire was a young guy who grew up in a trunk performing. So,
Right.
but they, after Astaire's wife died, Jean was by himself, and Astaire would come by. Jean said he would come by in his Rolls Royce and pick up Jean, and they would go have dinner together. So yeah, they were linked, and they were gentlemen. They're gentlemen, and deep regard for each other.
Well, that's great. I was always afraid there was some sort of rivalry there, but that's nice to hear.
There was no competition because they weren't competing against one another.
Well, and a friend of mine and I, when we were younger, watching these movies growing up, we had this, debate about who was a better dancer. And we basically, like you said, ended up where they're both great dancers. They're just two different dancers.
That's what Jean and Fred always said. It's like comparing apples and oranges.
Yeah.
You can't really compare them. I think the thing with Jean is that he broke new ground. He created a new style of dance, and really a different style for the camera, and that was what he wanted to be remembered for. But you can't compare them. It's a completely. Some people will say, well, Astaire is more graceful, but I look at Jean and he's the epitome of grace. So I think people use different adjectives, but. I'm kind of biased, but
as well you should be. Well, that's all we have time for today on this the TOCA backstage. Look behind the scenes when we are actually backstage. I mean, this is the green room. I don't know why it's not green. I'm here with Patricia Ward Kelly, talking about Jean Kelly, the legacy, coming up at the Armstrong Theater. I urge you all to come out. It's Saturday, October 6th at 2 and 8 p.m. Tickets are available at torrancearts.org or by calling the Armstrong Theater box office. Hope to see you at the theater. Thank you.
And I do hope to see you at the theater. As I said, I do greet everybody.
That's right.
And I will stay as long as anyone wants to come up afterward. And that's fun because then people get a chance to tell me how he touched their lives or their mothers or their grandmothers or something. So
it's going to be a great evening.
I look forward to seeing you.
Thanks so much.